Welcome everybody to the Seen and Heard podcast, a conversational series. Today I have the great privilege of being joined by Charlotte Sharpe. Charlotte is a psychotherapeutic counsellor who specialises in working with ex-boarders. Her first career was in finance, and then she was a stay-at-home mother before embarking on postgraduate counselling training. And she now works as a counsellor part-time and is also a co-owner of a small vineyard in East Sussex. She believes counselling is an incredibly powerful tool that can help individuals recognise, accept and bear the traumas they have suffered and move to a position of living when they are so often only surviving. She was at boarding school from 8 to 18, and it was not until she was in her late 40s that she began to realise how harmed she had been by her boarding experiences. Her recovery journey, which is still ongoing, together with Nick Duffel's diploma in specialist psychotherapy with ex-boarders, has inspired her to raise awareness of the impact of boarding. To this end, she has recently joined the board of Boarding School Concern, who used to be Boarding School Survivor Support, for those who knew it as the previous title, whose long-term goal is to create a cultural shift by shining a light on boarding school harm. Welcome, Charlotte.
Thanks very much, Chris. Good to speak to you.
Yeah, thank you so much for making the time today. It's lovely to have you here. We've had some really nice conversations so far, where we've worked together, as well as you're one of the counsellors on the specialist therapeutic and counselling directory we've got on Seen and Heard. So
that's a real privilege to be amongst that august group of counsellors.
Yeah, thanks. It's really nice that there's such a fantastic group of people on the directory, and obviously loads out there as well who are working with ex-boarders who we don't yet know about. So if you're listening, then please do get in touch, because we want to keep making that directory amazing. But it was lovely to connect. And then when you mentioned that you'd become a director of Boarding School Concern, I thought, oh, that's fantastic. We must have a conversation. So thank you for making the time.
Oh, thank you.
Cool. Well, I always like to start with podcasts with going backwards to the start, to understand a little bit more about how someone's life has been and how it's shaped the work that they're now doing. So, yeah, you tell me a little bit about how things were for you growing up, perhaps before 8 when you went off to boarding school, and how it was.
Yeah, it's always really interesting, I think, that, because I think whatever we're experiencing as children, that is our normal. So we think, oh, that's normal. Everybody else is like that. And it's not until we are adults and perhaps start reflecting that we realise it's not quite so normal. So ostensibly, I had a very privileged upbringing, really. But I was left with nannies. I did have a father who drank, and I did have a narcissistic mother, none of which I knew. And so I thought that was kind of, isn't this how everyone's house, broadly speaking, is like? So you think it's pretty normal, but obviously those things have an impact on you for the rest of your life, and especially when you first go to boarding school.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Charlotte. Yeah, thanks for sharing. And obviously, it's taken a lot of personal work to be able to speak about it so clearly, so eloquently. But as you say, for young people growing up, it's just normal. Same for school. The school rules, all the weird quirks, they're just normal. They're sort of how things are done. What kind of a child were you? So what were you into?
Well, that's quite an interesting question. I loved. I was quite a chatty. I wanted to ask everybody questions. I was brought up in a seen and not heard environment. Funnily enough, that was exactly what my upbringing was. So I was probably silenced quite early on in life, but I was ostensibly quite bubbly. I'd play on my own. I had an elder brother, but I did a lot of mucking about in the garden. We had quite a large garden, so I was really lucky. I would spend quite a lot of time with the gardener, doing things, picking strawberries. I remember in the summer eating far too many, probably then being sick, but all the sort of things, being a really normal little girl in the environment I was in, but then aged I did have a slightly bizarre upbringing because I hadn't been to school. I had a governess when I was very little, which made it. And again, I thought that was normal, which will sound really bizarre to, I should imagine, the majority of your listeners. But then if your first experience of school is being sent away, when I look at it, and if I look at the little girl that was sent away, that must have been utterly terrifying. I'd never even been in a playground, let alone, and then you're just left at school. So, but whatever your experience is prior to going to school, that abandonment that you feel, especially if you go under the age of 11, is indescribable. And I think for many people, it is just completely forgotten and dissociated. Others, they remember it as if it's a film constantly running in their head.
Thank you, Charlotte. Thanks for sharing that. And just hearing that, actually, boarding school at 8 was your first experience of school. As you say, for some, they might have been to a local primary school or something else, but you were educated by a governess at home for a while, and then off at 8. And lovely to hear sort of that kind of playing out in the garden, energetic, full of beans. Do you still connect a lot with the outdoors, with gardening and things like that? Because you got the vineyard you mentioned.
Well, I do. It's funny, I've come back to that, and whether the full circle of life, isn't it? So I've definitely come back to that now. I'm of an age, I'm fast approaching 60. So my kids they've left home, sort of. They do come back a lot, which is fantastic. But so we are doing much more in the garden, and my husband and I have just planted a vineyard 3 years ago. So that really is gardening on a grand scale. But just lovely being outside. I think that being outside, the other day we were picking grapes in the pouring rain, but somehow it was absolutely fantastic. And it's you're standing there thinking, oh, I'm going to so enjoy being inside soon, and just I think that aliveness, I think you can get from being outside. It's huge, and I think and you're right in the moment. And I think it in a way, I suppose it's an escape, isn't it? But you're right in the moment. You're doing this really sort of this manual job, and you've just got to get it done, and that's all you're thinking about. Which I think can be really helpful, because in this day and age when we have so many demands of our immediate attention, be that our phones or work or whatever it is, we're having so much going through our head all the time, and to be able to clear that, I think, is incredibly helpful.
Thank you. Really important, that sort of mindfulness, presence. Disconnecting from tech and things. We'll have to talk a bit more about the kind of the healing side of things and the connection side a bit later on. But was yours a boarding family? You mentioned an older brother, your parents. Was it sort of within the family history generationally?
It's interesting that my mother was sent to a Catholic school, Catholic boarding school. I had thought my father boarded, but no, he didn't board. He was very much an establishment person. And I think it was something, I can probably say this because my parents are no longer with us. I think my parents were slightly more than social climbers. I always describe them as social astronauts, because and I think it was partly, I think that's what you did when you became, so they did these things because that's what was expected. That's what everybody did. It was kind of it showed where you were in society. It was almost like a badge, wasn't it? And so, well, why wouldn't you do that if you are that sort of person? And I think that's why it happened as well. And I think, which I think still goes on today, is that this is the best thing for my child. I don't think for a moment my parents didn't think they were doing the best thing for me. They made sacrifices to send me. They scrimped and saved. But my brother was sent before me. He was a couple of years older than me, so he went before me. And I remember leaving him at his boarding school and seeing him, behind the curtain crying. I mean, whether that actually happened or whether it's a memory that I've made up from what was going on, I don't know. but that is my lasting impression of his experience. And I don't have any memory of ever being left at school. Not throughout my entire time, even up until I was older. I don't remember being left at school, but I remember being picked up. So, which says a lot, I think.
Thank you for sharing that. It was quite moving. Feel that thinking about your brother. I'm an only child, I don't have any siblings, but the thought of I've got twins, twin girls, and they're so close that if one of them got left somewhere and they could see them crying, I think it would be a serious issue. But yeah, as you mentioned, don't remember ever being left. I don't remember ever either. But I do remember the start of the driveway to school. They're usually down a very long drive. And I think I'd learned very quickly I would basically shut off as soon as I hit the drive. And therefore I never actually remember the handover. I don't remember my first day. I don't, a lot of people have got it seared into their memory that first day. I don't remember. I think something must have happened before, but thank you for sharing your experience. And so tell me about the little girl who went at 8 then. How did she find school?
It's interesting, but can I just make a response to what you said? Because I think that's really interesting that you saying that you two couldn't remember it and you kind of shut off at the top of the drive. I mean, I think that's very illustrative of how traumatic this experience is, because we dissociate. We blank it out because it's too terrifying. It's unbearable for us at that age to be able to cope with that abandonment and trauma. And I think that's really important. But for me as a little girl, how did I find school? Oh, I mean, I hated it. But I always knew I hated it. I said quite early doors I hated it. I was accelerated a year above and I was an August baby. So I was bullied. So I was bullied at school. It was a very traditional school in North Norfolk. In fact, it was a school that Diana Spence went to. And it was, pets and midnight feasts is what it was, billed at. This lovely, friendly school. My experience was very, very different. As I said, I was bullied. The teachers weren't very nice either. There were a couple of nice teachers, but most of them were pretty horrible. And there was I do remember just there being no comfort. Suddenly you're in this huge dormitory. And if you remember, I said I was quite chatty. And one of the things if you got caught talking after lights out, you were sent in the corridor. And this is a very common experience for people who are sent to boarding school. I spent quite a lot of my first couple of terms in the corner, in the corridor for about half an hour every night because I got caught talking. So again, you learn to shut up. You learn, you're not even allowed to have that comfort of talking to the girl in the next door bed. So you're literally on your own with it. So I don't know how I experienced it because I can't remember how I experienced it. But I would say I was pretty terrified. Eventually, obviously I'm making assumptions here. My behaviour became such at home that I was taken away from that school, but only after 2.5 years. And so I obviously said, I do remember saying to my father eventually, I hate it, I'm not going back. And that's so I was taken away.
Thank you. Yeah, I felt something in my body there when you talked about talking after lights out and being sent out to the corridor. Yeah, there's something still left there. Around, we had the same thing, and often as well that you would be queued up for a beating the next day if you were caught talking after lights out. So I have very, very vivid memories of waiting outside the headmaster's office to go in and receive either cane slipper or green flash trainer, with a sort of 3 options depending on the severity of the crime. But I was talking with someone yesterday who's doing research into this area, and she went to a boarding school much later, sort of probably half my age. And she was surprised at how when I mentioned how long the private schools hung on to corporal punishment for after the ban in the UK. A good 8 to 10 years they clung on to it as a tradition. She was quite blown away by that, I think. So whether it was the sort of psychological abuse of being left on your own, tired, late at night in the corner of a room, having to think about what you've done because you were talking again, and not getting that psychological safety from the girl on the bed next door, or whether it was physical stuff or whatever. It's just that, as you said, you learn very quickly. Mistakes, were not an option, and you were on your own.
Yeah, and I think it is. I mean, it's just a terrible. The other thing that you don't have is any of that. I remember every morning we used. Well, it probably wasn't every morning, but we used to have our hair brushed by matron, and you'd stand in a long queue, like you were in the army or something. And you stood to have your. And I used to love that because it was the only time I was ever touched. Only time anyone showed any physical sort of any and to have been from, because my parents were actually quite tactile. I was hugged as a child. So to suddenly go into this environment where nobody has anything to do with you when you're only 8, when nobody holds your hand, nobody, and I know being touched by teachers can be emotive and can bring up a lot of things for people. But I think that's one thing I remember. You don't have any of that sort of comfort either. And you exist in a very Lord of the Flies environment. I mean, that book play, I don't know if people have seen it, but I mean, it depicts the whole boarding school thing and how you've got your leader who's a bully, and then you've got the child who's bullied, and you're just left to police yourself. Even at that age, you're left to police yourself. You get prefects who and then who then are the ones that police the corridors. And I mean, it's archaic in the extreme. And then if you're in a boys' school, as you intimated, you then have the beatings on top of all of that. It's just horrific. I mean, that's the only words I can find to use to describe it.
Yeah, thank you, Charlotte. You touch on something there that's so critical, this touch starvation. So important, and as you're right to mention that obviously we're talking about appropriate touch.
Yep.
But whether it be, holding hands with your friend, or having a hug with a friend, or whether it's a teacher putting a hand on your shoulder just to let you know you're okay, or to pick you up when you hurt yourself and things like that. That absence of touch starvation, causes a withering and dying at a soul level, within a human being. It starts to, as Charles Spencer said, the sort of cauterize those parts of those connective parts of you. And the thought of that, and said, it was great that you had that from home. So it must have been such a wrench to lose it.
And I think whatever your home experience is, I mean, if maybe you weren't touched and you go to boarding school, so it's been very normalised for you, it's still awful because you've always missed that. If you had it and then you don't have it, it's also awful. I mean, whichever way, just because maybe you weren't hugged a lot in your family home doesn't mean that you didn't need it and you weren't missing something. You were just maybe missing something you never had. Whereas obviously I was missing something I had. And we are human beings. We are in relation to others. We don't exist in isolation, I think. But that's what we learn at boarding school. I think boarding school call it independence. I can't even think of the right word to describe it, but it's. I think it's more isolation than independence. Yes, we do everything, but we do it on our own. We learn that actually you can't trust, partly trust, but you can't rely on anyone else. You shouldn't be asking anyone else. You should be able to do this yourself. And I think that as we get older, that has huge ramifications for us.
Yeah, thank you, Charlotte. Yeah, that independence. I mean, if you look into the literature at all of kind of what human beings need, we are interdependent, but the system preaches independence. And actually, if you look at sort of just how society is in general outside of boarding school environment, but there is far too much of a drive for independence, and not understanding our position in the web of life, of the planet, of the universe, of kind of society, etc. So yeah, that separation and independence, I can hear that. So yeah, you go.
Well, no, I was thinking we're a boarding school, aren't we? We said, oh, well, it's so good because your children will be independent. Well, I mean, I have 3 kids. They didn't go to boarding school. My son did for his final sort of 4 terms when he was in the 6th form, but they didn't at their early years or before GCSEs, any of them, and the girls didn't. And they're all very independent. They all live in London, but they are still dependent. I mean, they still are dependent on us to a certain extent, that they will turn to us if there's an issue. And because they have a relationship with us. And I think that's what relationship is about. Because when you are in a relationship and you're in either an intimate relationship or parental relationship, you are dependent on them to a certain extent. And that's okay. You can still be independent and perfectly capable of living an independent life, but you still you are in relation to other people who you depend on. And I think that's fine. But I think what boarding school breeds is, no, you've got to be independent. You've got to be able to cope. You shouldn't ever be able to be, you shouldn't be going back to mummy and daddy and asking things. Well, that's what my friends do, and that's what I do to my friends. And now I have an adult relationship with my children. So that I think that's what's missing. And that's one of the real flaws of boarding school, is we teach this complete solitary independence.
You opened the door to something that I'd like to talk about, where you mentioned the kind of background that people come from to go into a boarding school. So, for yourself, you mentioned, it was narcissistic mother, drinker, father drinker in the house, governess. So that was, but hugs, but tactile. And so that's the kind of the attachment, if you like, of how you went into school. Others would have gone in with been to the local primary school, very, very loving, tactile parents, very connected, very safe, and they'll experience then a huge shock. Could you talk a little bit around the different attachment styles and kind of what people come in with, and then what happens as a result of the boarding process?
Yeah, I mean, that's quite interesting, because I won't use too much jargon here, but, just to suffice to say, I mean, it's so nuanced, and I'd love to be able to give a completely clear answer to this. But, you could say, if you're securely attached, that when you get to boarding school, it's a dreadful rupture, so it's even worse. Or you could say, well, you're securely attached, so you feel secure at home, so you feel stronger and you're better able to cope with it. It just depends, and there are so many things that feed into that. If you're avoidant attachment, well then, great, you don't have attachments at school, so you're well prepared for it. But that avoidant attachment could put you in a worse position to cope with the boarding. Does that all make sense? So I think it's just so complicated and nuanced to say A equals B. I mean, one therapist I had actually when I was training said to me, your childhood explains everything but predicts nothing. And I think that is absolutely brilliant, and I use it a lot, because, so you may have had a secure attachment. So how does that impact when you get to school? Well, there are so many other things that come in with that. Maybe how far school away is. Are your parents coming fairly regularly? I mean, I was sent we had exeacs every 3 weeks. Quite typical for my generation, and then half terms. But I had to stay. I don't remember what happened the first exeac, but I know my parents were in Australia on an extended holiday. So I assume, and I didn't have much family, so I assume that I was left at school. But I have no memory of what happened then. So I mean, I think it's very, so my attachment Maybe because I'd always been trying to, because if you have a narcissistic parent, you're always trying to attune to them, as opposed to the parent attuning to the child, which is the appropriate, healthy. I always feel quite nervous using those sorts of words because I think they can sound a bit judgmental, and that's the last thing I want to do. So I was quite used to tuning to other people, so I sort of was able to tune in and find a way to survive, even though it was pretty awful. So maybe that put me in a good position. But I didn't have the secure attachment that I was probably still looking for. Well, I wasn't going to find that at school. So that's quite difficult. That's really a very burbled answer, isn't it, to your question? I think what I want to say is it's very complicated and it depends on so many different things.
Thank you. It's a great answer to the question because it's so complex. As you so rightly say, many people would say if you're avoidant attached, you came from a sort of a generational boarding family or a family that were quite emotionally distant. Then you're perfect. You're set up for it. But as you really carefully nuance that, actually, if you go in with some attachment, you feel like you've got something to come home to. I certainly always felt that I didn't have much to come home to because home was very detached. And therefore, perhaps that's others who had a secure attachment may have had some hope to keep them going for those holidays and things like that. It's very difficult, but what I can hear coming through very clearly is however you come into boarding school, there is always going to be that initial shock of being left, of being there on your own, and of having to sort of conform to a set of rules and norms that are completely abnormal and strange. So you mentioned that was it an all girls school you went to, or a co-ed?
It was all girls. I was all girls all the way through. Actually, for my sixth form, we went to a nearby boys' school for subjects I did because I read sciences, and they didn't have the teachers. Because also, I think my generation, often girls' schools weren't academic. You weren't really expected to go to university. Well, I certainly wasn't, or do anything like that. That wasn't my imagined future. So it was. But I also think it's worth pointing out that the attachment trauma very much happens, in my view, and I think Joyce Shevrin was slightly this view as well, that from below aged 11, simply it's an attachment trauma. Going to boarding from 13 to 11, it's more nuanced, but I would still say when you're 13 and above, it's less an attachment trauma, it's more traumas around developmental and psychological maturation, if that's such a word. I think I've just made that up, but
no, you're good. You're good.
Maturing psychologically, that is affected by the boarding experience. So I think that's just, sorry, that was a bit of a sidebar.
No,
thought worth mentioning, clarifying that at this point.
No, that's great, and we're going to come into your experience of being, in your teens at an all-girls boarding school, and as your experience as a counsellor, some of the things that sit around that, around kind of development. But let's stay with something you sort of alluded to there, which is the expectations on girls in school. You said that there wasn't an expectation for you to go to university, etc. What were these schools set up to deliver when you went?
Well, I think when we went, and this was something that absolutely, I think Joyce Shevrin in her book laid this out very clearly, that women were educated to serve. And we were taught, we were literally taught sewing, which I was absolutely appalling at. We were taught sewing, cooking, I think it's called domestic science. We were meant to be being ladies, is what we were taught to be. And the fact that, the expectations on me from my education was that I maybe did a flower arranging course, a cooking course, maybe a secretarial course, and then I married well. That was the expectation, and that I would be the supportive wife. I didn't do that, but but I think, and so I mean, I have friends, I have contemporaries from different schools who got straight A's at A level. Quite simply, they should have been Oxford, Cambridge in our generation. They were told, oh, you don't need to go to university. So there was just, you were educated differently. It wasn't, there were the academic schools, the Wickham Abbeys of this world, and there were a few, and in London, St Paul's, those sort of schools there were a few academic schools, but broadly speaking, it wasn't an academic education. It was more of a, I suppose, social education, for want of a better way of putting it. And I think that's very different. So straight away with this underpinning in these schools, it's like you're almost second best before you've even got out of the door. And that just stays with you. It stays with you in your relationships. You think, well, I'm the person that has to be bobbing behind, and I've been told I've got to be quiet and I can't speak unless I'm spoken to. And I think it's overcoming that in your life, which is very challenging.
Thank you. Feeling anger coming up now, thinking about my girls, nearly 14, and the idea that anyone would be closing doors for them, I find brings up a lot of anger for me. But as you say, that there was very much, it was a grooming system for women to be of service and for men to lead, and be leaders. That was very much how it was set up. Do you think it's changed?
Yeah, I do think it's changed. And women are, but it has changed. But fundamentally, the underpinning of these schools is still the same. So you've still got that historical background. And as we know as a country, our historical background and what's gone in the past and how we've behaved in the past around the world underpins and affects attitudes, laws, everything. And that too happens in schools. So how these schools were originally set up, how they were run, not that long ago. I'm not that old, that that they were run like that. So I had, when my daughter, she was reading, but she was a day girl, her chemistry master taught some of my friends. So you've got the same people. So he was obviously a very junior and very young teacher when he was teaching some of my friends, but for him to still be about, so you've still got you might even have some of the same staff. So there's bound to be some of the same attitudes. And I think we can't forget that we live in a patriarchal world. We've only got to glance just briefly over the pond, or even here, to see how attitudes towards women are, I think, taking just a little bit of a step backwards, which is quite frightening. So it hasn't changed, but there are still, should we say, ripples, I think, rather than waves of him.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I think based on some of the schools that we work with at Senior Head Schools, I can 100% say that there are teachers there in their 70s who have gone through, who literally went to boarding school, went to university, came straight back to a boarding school, and I've been there ever since. And that's not saying all of those people are good, bad, or indifferent. It's just a fact that you are saying culturally. The longevity of these schools, the tradition aspect, and the nature that they don't always require qualified teachers, and often there are people there who've been there a very, very long time and who move between schools within the same system, does create quite a closed culture, closed system. And we've recently spoken to people like NSPCC and others who still say they can't get into the boarding and independent schools to talk to the young people about topics that are important to them, because it's still largely a closed system. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And one thing I wanted to talk about, so within an all-girls school, when you were there, and also in your understanding as a director of boarding school concern, your counselling work, the way, because it was a controlled environment. The way
Oh,
girls were controlled was often different to the way boys were controlled. So boys, it may have been more around the physical, the violence, the sort of physical punishments, etc., or the use of games and sports to kind of control. Talk to me, please, about how it was for girls, and what was it like between the girls themselves and with the teaching staff and the girls.
um, control. How was it done? I think it was done. It was done, wasn't it? As I referred to earlier, a bit of a Lord of the Flies. You were left. You had to police, especially in the senior school, the prefects. You were made a prefect, and then I remember policing, going around, walking around the dormitories, and telling people to be quiet after lights out. So you were. So that's they were controlled like that. You're controlled through silencing, aren't you, all the time? Don't tell your friends, or you don't sneak, you don't do this. So there was much more almost a psychological control, I think, in a girls' school. I never experienced beating. I'm not aware of it having happened. It may well have. But it was much more of that sort of control. There was a lot of, I experienced quite a lot of bullying. I know it went on. I think there was very much that group control within the girls' boarding schools, and I think really through the silencing and not sharing, not telling, not being a telltale tat. You wouldn't tell the teachers; they're not particularly interested. They've got a lot to do. So I think by using that as a tool, you learn very quickly. And they keep you in control. And they keep you in control also by keeping you busy the whole time. You've constantly got bells for this, bells for that. My memory is that you had, even Sunday afternoon, you had a walk, but you might have a little bit of free time then. We could go to the local town to buy sweets on a Saturday afternoon. But again, it was between, I don't know, 2 and 4, for instance. I can't quite remember. But so they keep you in control by literally keeping you busy all the time. And so often ex-boarders, and I know I do it myself, I timetable my day. And almost when I've got a free day, I just don't know what to do. I'm still lost. But now at least I know why I feel lost. And I know, okay, I feel a bit, a bit at sea here. The word I would use is discombobulated. But it's all right. I can now sit with that feeling and go, actually, do you know, it's okay. I don't need to be timetabled. I can actually just spend half an hour making myself a coffee and just pottering. It's okay. I don't need to. In fact, I don't even need to potter. I can just sit and look at the garden and whatever, and be able to enjoy that. And that can be just as productive as actually doing something. But that's what we miss out on, I think, at schools and in girls' schools.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Charlotte. I think you've hit the nail on the head with something that hasn't changed, and if anything, may have even got a little bit worse in the current schools. The pupils we speak to, the teachers in independent school system are totally burnt out, and it's the excessive timetabling that's leading to issues for young people: anxiety, self-harm, eating disorders, exhaustion, just chronic fatigue, or autoimmune conditions and things, where the body's just breaking down because it's a sort of 7 till 9 o'clock day. And a lot of that I'm hearing is being perpetuated by the parents, who are using these schools effectively as wraparound care. So even if it's not boarding, even if their children aren't boarding, the independent schools are supposed to really, day pupils, are supposed to take them sort of dawn till dusk, so that the parents can go and do their work, live their life, whatever. So that burnout and that timetabling is really powerful, what you said. I know it for myself. I know a lot of people who work in independent schools, they are the same. Even if they didn't board themselves, they've sort of, as adults working in them, have become indoctrinated into a timetabled life where a pause for reflection is kind of time wasted.
And I think we never had anything like mindfulness when I was at school. That would be tantamount to psychobabble. There was that sort of language was used. And, that readily came to my mind because that was the language that was internalized to me. You didn't, you only were concerned with your psyche if you had gone mad, or so you very much had to just soldier on. You had to carry on, but your body I am a great believer in the psyche soma. So if we internalize anxiety, which is fundamentally what happens when we go to school, when we go to a boarding school, because there's the big thing also for me about being at a boarding school, especially when we're younger, but in fact all the way through, is you are in an institution where nobody loves you. And I know there are homes where there are disordered homes where people don't feel loved and indeed aren't. But that is the exception, I believe. It's not what everybody who goes to boarding school, they don't all come from that. They might be, I've no idea of the stats, but it might be, say, 2%. So for 2% of the kids, yes, it might be better to be in boarding school. But generally, for most of them, it's not. There's no one there that unconditionally loves them. And that's what you really miss when you're at a boarding school. And that just simply can't be replaced, can it? That parent who susses out that something's wrong with you, and as nice as, and they are lovely people who work in these schools, the housemasters, the headmasters, all these people, they really care, and they really care about their children, but with the best will in the world. I mean, I had 3 children, and I felt stretched. If I had 30 I was trying to look after, there was no way in a million years I could have met their psychological needs. It just simply wouldn't have happened. You just can't, however clever or wonderful you are. It's just impossible. And I think that's what we forget, that children aren't getting that.
Thank you, Charlotte. In Loco, Parentis.
Yeah,
which is to deliver all those things that the parents aren't around to deliver. They say unconditional love, appropriate touch, and seen and noticing, really noticing what's up. And I think, you talk about the numbers there. You sort of, I think it's improved a bit on the numbers side, but I do remember it was, sort of 30 or 40. I've even heard of 60 to 80 pupils to staff ratio in the boarding houses, and so it was Lord of the Flies. It had to be. It had to be the fagging system or prefect system or whatever was in place, because the maths didn't work. So the control had to, really come from the systems, the processes, the ways of speaking, the norms. Wyndham Wallace calls it a cult, the sort of cultish stuff, control mechanisms that we use. So, thank you for pointing to that. And I know when I had a conversation with wonderful therapist Amelia White, she said about shame in girls' schools, and shame as a mechanism. So for the boys, it was often sort of the violent stuff, or sexual abuse by teachers, for instance, or boys on boys. But she said for the girls, what she saw was a lot of shame, and she works with a lot of female ex-boarders who were shamed throughout their entire schooling. What was your experience of that, either as a when you were there or as a counsellor?
Well, I think, shame is a big thing, isn't it? We are shamed. We feel. I think one of the things we do feel is especially when we go young, but at any point, whether if we go older and we hate it, we feel ashamed that we hate it. Our parents have parted with a lot of cash for us to do this. They might have made a lot of sacrifices to send us there, and here we are absolutely hating it. So we feel ashamed. There must be something wrong with us. So I think there's a lot of shame around that. I was definitely shamed by teachers. I was particularly bad, and still am a particularly bad speller. If I was never tested, but I wouldn't be at all surprised if I was dyslexic to some degree. If I write a letter now, I have a dictionary beside me. I love the fact that we can, on the computer, on the PCs and everything, we can, it's done for us, because I'm just no good at it at all. So, as I was definitely shamed for not being able to do it, when if you weren't able to do something that you should have been able to do, you were shamed by others, you were laughed at, you you felt shamed if you were the last person that was picked for the team, all that sort of thing. So there was a lot of shame going round, a lot of shame. And that was probably also used as a way of controlling people.
Yeah, that control mechanism.
Yeah,
It's a very powerful one, shame. So, when you're working with ex-boarders, then in your work that you now do, I often describe shame, guilt, and shame as like a paywall. There's sort of, it's like a blocker between you and what's behind the emotion or the memory or whatever it might be. How do you work with people who are really deeply in that shame?
Who about boarding and try are well behind their shield, their survival personality. I mean, I think the word I'd use is gently, just very, very gently. I think the way I started with quite a lot of psychoeducation, that because a lot of it is people, and indeed myself, I was completely unaware. I thought it was the best thing that ever happened to me, a real classic. And I still have people who sit in front of me and say, "Oh no, it was wonderful, best thing that ever happened to me." And then you start just gently talking about some of the things that might happen. Oh, tell me about that. And then just naming it for what it is. Oh, that sounds hard. And then maybe you might use the word, oh, that sounds slightly abusive to me. And just very gently, especially when you're talking about whether it's psychological or physical abuse, because the shame will have been projected onto them from the perpetrator of the abuse. So you just have to do it very gently. And I think that's the way I work with it. It's just, and when you're working with someone, you can see how they are responding to what you're suggesting, what you're talking about, whether it's being received or it's not being received. For some people, it is just such a relief that it wasn't them, and this really is awful. Oh, really, do you think, and it was that, oh gosh, I've always thought it was horrible, and yes, it is, isn't it? And it's not your fault. You haven't done anything wrong. You are okay. I use a lot of that. You are okay. Things happen to you that should never have happened to you.
Yeah, it's not your fault. It's okay. Yeah, thank you, Charlotte. There's a couple of so many things going through my head of things I want to come back to and want to go to. I think because we said we would get to it, let's have a little bit of a time on. We talked about ages of boarding. So pre-11, you said, I've never met a developmental psychologist who can root for it as an idea, except in the absolute most extreme situations at home, in which case they all say the same thing. Well, that should be going through the social care system. That needs to look at an in-home intervention, parental education. Then it needs to go to the next level and be looking at whether that child can live with family members or extended family. Then it's fostering. Then it's a group home, a care home. So there is a process there, but there is something about boarding where, a few quid, or, you're in the military and you can get a bursary or whatever it is. You can circumnavigate all of that system that's there and just go straight into, privileged abandonment, as Nick Duffel calls it, or paid for care. So pre-11, the numbers are very, very low now and declining. And if it wasn't really for overseas children, that function would largely have gone by now. But we talked about teens and that developmental trauma, that developmental delay or sort of impact. Could you speak a bit about that, maybe from your perspective and also from your knowledge as a counsellor?
I think from my own personal perspective, it's all the classics. It's maturing as a woman the first time you get your period. You are taught to use products by your contemporaries. You're handed something under the loo, because you never had solid loo doors. You could hand things. So that the lack of privacy is astounding, really. So all those sort of things. I remember when I went to I think it must have been about 11ish, something like that, 11 or 12. You they thought that you were corrupted. I haven't thought about this in years, actually. And they would ask you questions. Do you know this? Do you know that? Do you know what a penis is? Do you know what sex is? Do you know what a blowjob is? I got 10 out of 10 because I had an older brother. So I knew everything. But that made me quite cool because I knew everything. But isn't it horrendous that's how you find out that in that kind of, that environment that you found out? And also, I was lucky. My parents were very liberal in that way. So I had been educated by them, so to speak. But it's that sort of thing that I think went on in my experience. And so I was being taught how to be a woman by other young girls who, well, how did they know? So, you're being taught by the wrong person. And I think that's one of the things that can happen in boarding schools. And again, it so depends. That's why I say it's so nuanced. It depends what happens in your family life. It depends maybe whether you come from a family where these things are never, ever spoken about. As I said, my parents were quite liberal, so I knew all about pills, abortion, and things like that. I would be telling everybody else about it. And I always said if I ever got pregnant, I would tell my parents. They'd be the first people I would tell, because that sort of thing, sex, was talked about around the kitchen table. It wasn't, it was a topic we could talk about. I didn't feel at all shamed by it. But maybe if you've come from a household where nothing like that is ever talked about, how do you develop How do you develop psychosexually? I mean, if, for instance, you're gay, for instance, and you're at a boarding school, and obviously homosexuality is completely frowned upon, and they try and avoid anything happening, any sex between the pupils. But so if that's never talked about and okayed at home, you are going to develop thinking there's something wrong with you if you're gay. I mean, and that's horrendous. Whereas, so again, all these things, it's very nuanced. Again, it depends. It's just a combination of so many things. It depends on your contemporaries. It depends on what home life is like. Whether maybe you have an older brother. I had an older brother, so I knew. So I was the cool girl. I had these parents who talked about it, so I was cool in that aspect of my boarding life. Does that make sense? Again, I've been pretty unhelpful in my response, haven't I? And in fact, it's complicated, but it can have this impact. And I suppose there's one thing, and I'm aware that I'm going on slightly here, but one thing that I think is really worth stressing is, I think when parents are choosing schools, and indeed still choosing boarding school today, it's the lack of knowledge that is in the public domain about the potential psychological impact of boarding. Because when you go to the headmaster of, say, the prep school, say, or if you go to the headmaster of the public school you're planning to send your kids to, they'll sell it as this fantastic thing, all-rounded education. They'll learn to sing, dance. They'll come out with 10 A stars or whatever it is. But I wonder if they said at the end of that, but I just have to say, there could be a psychological impact. This could affect them psychologically and could impact the way they relate to others and their intimate relationship for the rest of your life. Are you still okay to sign here? I think a lot of parents will go, whoa, oh, I didn't realise that. And that's what I would, and why I've joined Boarding Concern, to try and just put that out there so people are making an informed decision, not just falling into a decision perhaps because it's what they did or what happened to them or what their family do or what their socioeconomic group do or whatever. It's about actually looking at everything. And then it may seem appropriate for them, and it may indeed be appropriate, but at least they've made an informed decision.
So powerful, Charlotte. Thanks. We just finished an article which has sort of 30 plus contributors, called "Is Boarding School Right for My Child?" And it just tried to unpack some of that, which is, if you've read that piece and the answer is still yes at the end of it, you do you. Whilst those schools are around, you make the decision. But as you say, if right now there is a very shiny prospectus, and on the other side there is a vacuum. And so it can't be an informed decision at the moment until there's more awareness. And it sounds like a really powerful voice that you're bringing to boarding school concern around this. I really honour that. So let's go to you met something I loved in the bio I read out, her recovery journey, which is still going on in brackets. So what worked for you? What did you try over the years on your journey that might help inform others listening? And and what's still going on? What's this bit that you're still working on?
Well, that's quite interesting. I mean, I first had therapy in my early 20s, and I dealt with step-by-step things. But then, gosh, and let me try and think, when was that? It was mid-20s. So it was about 1993. So Nick hadn't even done his film. So no one knew that, I was partly in this psychological state because of my boarding experience. And then I went, because it was a good experience for me, I went back to therapy, probably mid-30s, when I hit a roadblock, so to speak. And then I decided to train as a therapist. I'd done a few courses and I thought, God, this is really interesting. And I had studied zoology at university. So I've got quite a kind of scientific, I was really interested in how the mind works and how it interacts with our body. And that just really fascinated me. So that's what got me thinking. And it wasn't till because then when you're training, obviously you have to do therapy at the same time. And my therapist handed me Joy's book and said, I think this might be relevant. And I read it. And literally every page I went, oh, yep, that's me. Yep. And it just, it was like such relief, because suddenly it made me understand my experience. And because I had always said I hated it. And my mother would often say, oh, of course you hated boarding school. And I say, yeah, I did. And I was shamed for hating it. And chose not to send my children to boarding school. And people said, oh, you're not saying, of course you hated it, didn't you? And I did. And then why would I, So that was been quite interesting as well. But sorry, I have just momentarily lost my train of thought there, Chris.
Okay. Just around some of the things that have worked for you, and
yes. So then I've just continued to dip in and out of therapy. To be honest, I've gone to therapy when I felt I've been struggling a little bit. I think once you've done some therapy, it's been helpful for you. I think that is very powerful as well, because we can go back. We can go to different therapists, because each therapist you go to and you work with will offer you something different or will help you with something different. And I can understand also the way I'm feeling about things that are going on in my life now, perhaps the stage of life I am in now. What happened when I was younger will also affect me today. So it's just going to therapy again and thinking, that's why I'm struggling with that. I can't believe that is still affecting me, but it is. And that, in combination with the other things that have happened to me, and so I think that what has helped me, what has helped me most is learning that it's okay to be vulnerable. And it's okay not just being vulnerable with your therapist, but vulnerable with other people. I have been, I was going to say delighted, but I'd almost be, I think delighted is the right word, at people's response when I am vulnerable, which is generally incredibly positive. And also, I do find if we are able to do that, it can engender the same from someone else, and that makes you feel even more okay about being vulnerable. And I think that has helped me as well. Actually, it's okay to not be okay, because you are trained to be okay. You are trained to be fine. That's one thing I hear a lot in my work. You'll start a session and I might say, how's this week been? I'm fine. It's fine. because that's what we have to be. And now I might say, well, been a bit rubbish actually this week, but you know, it is, soldier on, or whatever you might, but you acknowledge, actually, I haven't had a great week. And that's okay. It doesn't mean that you're then going to overshare, but you can do that. You can do that in your social relationships. You don't always have to, walk into the pub and say, oh yeah, I'm fine, everything's wonderful. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it really does. Yeah, I mean, I did a podcast recently, and a big section of it was called "Vulnerability is a Superpower." And as you say, once you start to model vulnerability, be vulnerable yourself, then you can model it for others. Then others will go, "Oh, it's okay. I can just make mistakes." For instance, we were coming on this podcast today, and I had made a mistake. I had forgotten to send something to you ahead of it, and a part of me, an old part, will always scream inside to move into. I would usually make an excuse, and if that excuse didn't land properly, I would become predatorial in my behaviour. So I attack as the best form of defence. I would then move. I would move to sort of find a way to diminish your experience of it, or it's not too bad anyway, or So I still feel that part bubble up. It goes, well, you could do all these things, but now I just go, I made a mistake. I'm really sorry. Let's carry on. Let's move on, and I'll make a little mental note. Okay, what can I do next time, etc. But that modelling of vulnerability is powerful. And when we do the sharing groups, that Seam the Head offer, or people go to a men's group or a women's group or group therapy, that thing of actually checking in. How are you really? Like, we might use pies, which is physically, intellectually, emotionally, and then socially. So actually ask people to look at those things. Well, actually, physically, I'm tired. I don't feel very well, or I've been having problems with my stomach. Intellectually, I'm totally, overwhelmed, or emotionally, I'm struggling at the moment with X, Y, or Z. Socially, my connections are poor. I've not reached out to friends recently. I've been in my own bubble. So it sort of nudges us to go something other than the British "not too bad" or "I'm fine, thanks," which is the sort of two-stop responses.
And also, I think from boarding, we don't come with that language at the end of our education. We don't know how, and words like overwhelmed, you're not meant to say things like that. You just carry on. So you learn not to show that side. And you don't even know actually how to say I'm overwhelmed. And I certainly couldn't have had to learn to say that. And also, you learn by being vulnerable. I think you then can say I'm overwhelmed and feel okay. You can. It's okay to be overwhelmed for a while. It will pass. And you will, and also reaching out to other people. We were talking, weren't we, right at the beginning, about that dependence on others. Yeah, I depend on my friends. And when I'm feeling overwhelmed, I go round for a coffee and we talk about it. And then I come away feeling better. And hopefully we've given each other something, and we've helped each other. And that's being dependent on other people. I'm a very independent person, but I do depend on my friends and I depend on my family.
Beautiful. Yeah. Thank you. And we're talking about connection here, the power of vulnerability. And I know, obviously, you're a director now for Boarding School Concern, and the Boarding School Concern conference, the annual conference, is coming up in November. I've been to it. It's absolutely brilliant. Tell us a little bit about why you joined Boarding School Concern, what you're doing, and tell us a bit about the conference as well.
Yeah, well, indeed, I heard you speak very eloquently at the conference. I think the conference is really, you get a very mixture of people. You get therapists, you get people who are right at the beginning of their journey, just really thinking, oh gosh, was boarding school, what effect did it have on me? To people who are much further down much further along, not down, along in their journey, saying, yes, I realise I'm working on the harm that it did for me. So there's a lot going on in the room. We, as the conference, I think we've got some good groups in the afternoon. Some of them in the past, maybe we've focused more on sort of the intellectual side of it, but this more we've got a couple of experiential groups, which I think will be really, really useful for people, because I think we're all different. We all have different journeys to make, if that makes sense. So just finding the one thing that works for you. Again, when I'm working with clients, I'll always say it's great talking to me, but also try and find other things that help you. Be that yoga, be that meditation, be it going for a walk, having a cup of tea. It doesn't need to be complicated. And I think now we are aware that there's a lot of energy, there's a lot of feeling in the room. And so we're very aware of that. So we will have people who will be on hand to help people who may be struggling with what it brings up. We're now very aware that walking into a room, and we have been for a number of years, that walking into the room is a bit like walking into the school hall. So that can be very triggering for people. Taking your seat, all that feels a bit like a school assembly. So we've got to be then a round tables for lunch. Where do I sit? Am I going to have a friend to sit next to? All these sort of things can be really triggering. So we will have people about to help with that. And again, in the groups, there will be always someone supporting the main lead of the group. So I think we're trying to make it a much more even more supported than it was, so that it's a gentle place for what can be really quite extreme emotions that can come up for people. And these things can come up unexpectedly. I suppose because a lot of boarding, especially being homesick, is grief. It's a bit like grief. My father died in 1990s, and I remember, a few years ago, I can't remember what it was that triggered me. I suddenly found myself crying, and just suddenly all this emotion came out. I think it was something on the radio. So we can be triggered completely unexpectedly. My kids, they were only little in the car, and they say, "What's wrong, Mum?" And you're kind of like, "Oh gosh, this is too complicated to talk about," But I think so. We're very aware that very small things can trigger this very raw emotion in people that some people might not even be aware is there at the moment. So we're very, and also it's very informative. There's just, and there are people there that have also experienced, so you can feel that actually it's okay not to have liked it. It's okay to have struggled.
Thank you. Yeah, for anyone listening who's thinking about going to the conference, in the show notes for this, there'll be a link to it, so you can find it easily. If you're struggling on the financial side to get yourself there, get the ticket, etc., do reach out to Boarding School Concern and have a conversation about that. Don't let that put you off.
Sorry, Chris. Sorry to interrupt you there. We have a scheme called Pay It Forward, where some spaces have been paid for, so that we can, if people are struggling, then they can get a partially financed or completely financed space at the conference, just to try and make it as accessible as possible.
Wonderful. Yeah, as a participant, when I went before, I can say to people, there's a fantastic mix. You get some speakers, really good. You get then a really lovely lunch. The food was excellent when I went, and then you get some time with others in the afternoon, some groups, and it sounds like some really interesting experiential stuff this year. Get to meet a few people. Then there's some books and things. Some people who've written great books are often around talking about those, and they're available. So I just found the whole thing very connected. I've always loved the work that Boarding School Survivor Support, the old name, and Boarding School Concern are doing. You've got some lovely directors and some good people. Just as we start to bring things to a close, why have you chosen to be a director, and what's your vision for it?
That's interesting. I realised I hadn't answered that half of the question when you were just
That's
talking.
Okay. It was a big question about the conference.
They all seem quite big questions. I think we could talk for hours, but I realised we do have a time limit. Well, I really wanted to start, as I was saying before, to kind of get the word out there that it could be harmful, that there was an impact, there is an impact, and that could not only will it provide people with all the information to make informed decisions in the future, it also enables people who've been through boarding school to understand how they are the way they are today, that actually school might have had an impact on them, and actually, oh, this is why I struggle with intimate relationships. Again, it's not me. It's not me. You know, I'm okay. And so we're trying to say, yeah, you are okay. This happened to you. This was an experience which has informed who you are and how you relate today. And we can't change unless, I firmly believe you can't change unless you know what the building blocks are. And then if we begin to understand that, we can start forgiving ourselves and gently move forward. But for me, it's a very gentle process. And I think that what Boarding School Concern are trying to do is highlight the impact and the harm that boarding can do. So that's what I want to do, but in a holding way, and in that gentle way, not in that sort of very school wagging the finger. You know, you've got to understand that this is what happened. It's more that, you know, I wonder if this happened to you, and how can we help you? How can we support you? You know, can we, and obviously people do get in touch, and we point them in directions of people like yourselves or Boarding Recovery should they want to find a therapist and things like that, so we can help them to begin their journey of healing.
Yeah, thank you, Charlotte. And thank you for your energy getting involved. I think, you know, I've had some great conversations with Pippa Palmer as well, and the newer directors who've joined. You know, really, really good people, and your hearts are in the right place. You're doing great work. So I would encourage anyone listening who's not got a ticket already, have a look at the conference. Can you just remind us, where is it? When is it?
It's on November the 1st. Yes, I'm not very good at this PR advertising bit, am I? It's on November the 1st, and it's in London. It's just near Euston. I should know offhand exactly where it is, but all the details are on the website.
That's cool.
That's the nearest train station, and it's all day. But if you feel, and I have done that in the past, you can only do half a day, then please just do that, because there is a lot that it can bring up, and so maybe just dipping your toe in for the first time would also be helpful.
Yeah, beautiful. So as we bring things to a close, Charlotte, I've really enjoyed our time together. Is there anything that you wanted to mention that you feel like you haven't had a chance to, or anything by way of a parting thoughts?
I think not. I mean, I think we really have covered everything. I just think it's great that there are organisations like yourself and Boarding School Concern who are just starting to keep pushing at the door to say, look, we've got to look at this. We've got to re-examine this area of education. Is it appropriate? What's it doing? What effect is it having? And it's not about criticising people who make the choices. It's not about, shaming people. That's the last thing we want to do. There's enough shame to do with boarding as it is. It's not about that. It's just about saying, oh, this might have happened, and then allowing people to explore what might have happened to them or people they're with, or whatever, people they're in a relationship with.
Thank you, Charlotte. Great final words. Ultimately, there just can't be anything in the shadows. It just has to be an open discussion.
Absolutely.
And without judgment, and from a heart-centered place. So let's finish there, because it's a great place to finish. It's been a wonderful conversation with Charlotte Sharpe. Thank you so much for your time today, for your work. For anyone listening, the links and stuff will be in the show notes to the Boarding School Concern conference near Euston. It's a Saturday, 1st November, and follow that link through and go and have a look and explore. And thank you so much for taking the time to listen. It's been lovely, and we'll say goodbye, Charlotte, and we'll say goodbye to everyone listening, and we'll see you on the next one. It's been the Seen and Heard podcast, a conversational series. Take care. Bye now.
Bye.